So let's start the day two with the keynote that challenges how we think about vulnerable disclosure and vendors' responsibility. Well, James required no introduction actually, right? He's a security engineer, he's a security researcher at Google Project Zero. He's known for his deep dives into Windows internals and logic bounds. He's been listed at #1 researcher by the MSRC and has won both Pontio and Microsoft mitigation bypass bounties. In this talk, if you don't care about a vulnerability, why should I? James will explore cases where vendors have chosen not to fix reported vulnerabilities, marking them as not fixed or won't fix. He will discuss the implication of these decisions and what they mean for the security community. Please join me in welcoming James Forshaw to the stage.
Okay. So, good morning. It's good to be back in Singapore. It's been a while. Obviously, we're waiting for my slides to appear. So I'm here to talk about a bit of vulnerability disclosure, a bit of how vendor response works, and some of the ways that it cannot work properly, and and what you can do about that if a vendor sort of pushes back on you and says, we won't fix a bug. Computers, terrible things. I don't know why we put up with them, to be honest. Anyway, I suppose I'll do a quick rundown of for the people who don't actually know who I am. I'm a member of the Google Project Zero team, and I work primarily on finding vulnerabilities in Windows and Microsoft platforms. That's not to say I don't try and find bugs in other areas, but Windows is my primary focus. Now I do that primarily through sort of static analysis, manual analysis, behavioral analysis. And for that reason, I write a lot of tools, and I write a lot of like blog posts and information about it. And there we go. We're finally up. Thanks very much. Obviously abusing Gemini here to get fancy pictures of pandas, because why not? I write a lot of tools. I also write books. I got a recent one out on Windows security internals, so if you haven't seen that, it's worth checking out. And I tend to look for logical vulnerabilities, so I don't write fuzzers. I don't really look for memory corruption type vulnerabilities. But this actually impacts the way in which I interact with vendors quite a lot, because a logical vulnerability can sometimes be kind of difficult to prove that it is a real vulnerability. If you have a crash report, like just a crash dump, it's kind of easy for a vendor to see, hey, we understand the root cause, we can actually do something about this. But when you've got a logical vulnerability, it can be more subtle, it can be more difficult to analyze. So I have this ideal life of a security researcher, right? You're enjoying the process of sitting in front of your computer, looking for vulnerabilities, trying to find that really cool, awesome vulnerability that makes your name and wins you $100,000 bug bounty, which happens once in a while, certainly to certain people more than others. And then, of course, if you're a good person in the security community, obviously morals vary, you would probably want to report this to vendors to get it fixed, right? And so you spend the next chunk of your time writing up a detailed report about what that vulnerability entails, the impact of that vulnerability, the root cause if you know it. You might develop a proof of concept so that you can demonstrate to the vendor that this really is a security bug and you should take me seriously. And so you send that off, and it wings its way to the vendor. And of course, in an ideal world, the vendor looks at that and goes, yep, we understand this bug. We think it's a security issue. We're going to fix it as soon as possible because it's such a serious bug and you're such an awesome security researcher. We love you, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, you can then chill by the beach, earning your 20% and enjoying life. Unfortunately, the all too real life of a security researcher can be you spend all your time finding, and it's great. You report that bug, expecting the vendor to take you seriously, understand your concerns, understand your report, and they kind of come back with some sort of wishy-washy, I guess it's a security issue, maybe, maybe not. Like, can you just do some extra work, unpaid work for us, just so you can verify that it's a real issue? Can be quite impersonal sometimes. This is, of course, assuming that you even get a response. Some vendors can just ignore you completely, just completely ghost you. And of course, at that point, you're going like, what the fuck, right? like, what can I do at this point? And yeah, there's actually a myriad of outcomes from reporting these security vulnerabilities. And of course, one category is the thing you've reported is not a security issue, according to the vendor. It might be because, for example, you've found a bug, but it's not crossing any security boundary. Now, in order to be a security issue, it needs to cross some sort of security boundary, whether that be from, say, low privilege to a high privilege user, or maybe it's from remote access to a system to arbitrary code execution on that same system. But if you're not crossing that boundary, then the vendor arguably is within their rights to say, no, not a security issue, we're not going to fix that. That's not our problem. And there's plenty of examples of boundaries which you think should be security boundaries, like UAC on Windows, which are, from the vendor's perspective, not, and you will not get them fixed. Or maybe, when you looked at this product, you were looking at a version which is currently unsupported. Ultimately, vendors have time, resource, monetary pressures, which mean that they can't support every version of their product indefinitely, as much as they might like to, or you might like them to. And maybe it just so happened that you looked at the unsupported version of their product, and they fixed it in the current released version of that product. And so they could legitimately say, nope, sorry, we do not support that version of the product anymore. That is not a security issue. And finally, like, God forbid this ever happens, you could just be wrong. Like, you literally could just be wrong. Maybe you misconfigured your system so that when you actually try to find this bug, it's actually due to your misconfiguration that this bug exists rather than the actual product itself. And so when they go to run it, it doesn't work. And of course, it's realized that the reason it doesn't work is because you've somehow made an error in your analysis. So, of course, in those cases, I generally think, well, okay, fine, that's it's my bad, or I've looked in the wrong places, I've not done my due diligence on this vulnerability. But of course, the overwhelming majority should be actual security issues. And of course, the ideal scenario, assuming you're reporting these things to vendors, is that it gets fixed. Now, one case could be every supported version of your product is fixed. And that is kind of like the absolute maximum ideal endpoint. Unfortunately, again, vendors only have a limited set of resources. So they might side like, well, we're basically going to deprecate these older versions anyway at some point. You should really use the latest version of this product. So we're only going to sort of fix the upstream, tip of the tree kind of part of the product. And you could quibble on that at that point, but at least they're still fixing that vulnerability. But what I want to focus on here is the final category, which is the won't fix category. So this is a category of issues where the vendor is clear that this is a security vulnerability in a limited sense. However, we're not going to fix it because we don't want to. Now, again, there's potentially many reasons for the vendor might do this. And again, a lot of it is down to resourcing. But obviously, one is it's not a priority. We don't believe your bug is actually serious enough that we are going to spend our time to fix it. Like, the impact is so low, the risk is so low of it actually being exploited in the wild, then we just don't care. The other category I've got here is by design. Like a good example is like you find a product, it's using SSL v2. Everyone knows SSL v2 is just hot garbage. You wouldn't use it in any modern product. But yeah, there's bugs in SSL v2, and they say, well, yeah, there is. You should use the latest TLS version. You shouldn't be using SSL v2 in our product. It's only there for backwards compatibility, and it is literally by design that these bugs exist, and there's nothing we can do about it, so we're not going to fix it. So in order to sort of illustrate this, I wanted to go through a couple of real-world examples of bugs that I've personally found in a couple of products where the ultimate sort of end result was the vendors are like, we're not going to fix it. And I'm going to start by talking about a bug in Chrome on Windows, which I reported back in 2014, before I was actually a member of Project Zero. If you want to look at the issue tracker, that's the link to the issue. And it's a bug in relation to Chrome's use of shared memory. So Chrome was one of the first browsers to really sort of push the idea of having a multi-process architecture for your browser. Prior to that, a lot of browsers tended to be monolithic. You had a single sort of browser process which ran and rendered all the web pages that you were potentially viewing. Like Firefox was a good example of this in the good old days, that everything just ran in a single process. And while that's extremely convenient from a development perspective, it has numerous disadvantages. One of them being reliability. Like modern web pages, even in 2014, could just run JavaScript and potentially allocate like massive amounts of memory. Especially when you're running this on a 32-bit system, that could result in a DOS, and your browser crashes and takes all your tabs with you and all your other browser windows with you. And that kind of sucks as a user. But it also has a potential advantage for security, because by isolating, for example, like HTML rendering, so any untrusted data rendering into a separate process, you can actually potentially sandbox those processes so that any vulnerability, of which there's clearly never any vulnerabilities in Chrome, it's the most secure piece of software ever, can't be used to compromise the rest of the system without at least breaking out of the sandbox as well, adding an extra step in the chain for any would-be exploiter. It also can be used for sort of isolating web pages from each other. Obviously, back in 2014, site isolation wasn't a thing, but even then, you had the concept of web UI pages, which is how the settings are implemented in Chrome. If you ran a web UI page, it would be running in a separate renderer process to general sort of internet-facing content. So even if you could compromise an internet-facing renderer process, you couldn't compromise these web UI pages as well, because even at the sandbox level, each renderer, in theory, shouldn't be able to talk to any other renderer. But of course, this has an impact. This has specifically a performance impact. In the monolithic case, everything's all running in the same process. It's really easy to share resources around between different components in the browser. But once you're going into this multi-process architecture with divisions of labor, you might, for example, try and access the network from the browser process because the renderer hasn't got permission to just talk to the network. But that HTML data and the JavaScript code needs to somehow get to that renderer process in a performant manner. And that renderer runs the HTML, runs the JavaScript, and then needs to render that content somewhere onto the screen. So again, it needs to sort of push this data back out of itself to somewhere which can render this information. So obviously, you can never make things work as if they were running in a single process. But one of the techniques that Chrome used to try and improve performance is by using shared memory. And this is a feature of basically any modern operating system. The ability to create a block of memory which can be accessed directly by multiple different processes on the same system. So in Chrome's case, the browser process can create some sort of shared memory block, which you can read and write to, but then potentially can share that memory block to a renderer in a read-only state, which basically says, hey, you can read memory, this memory block, but you can't actually modify it. And the advantage of this is potentially, especially if this is like a large memory buffer that you're using, because it's read-only in the places where it's actually like a low privilege, the browser process could potentially share it to a different renderer and be guaranteed that there's no ability for one renderer to compromise another through this shared memory section area. So this is a feature that Chrome is pretty much built in from the start and is used all over the place. And even like modern versions of the IPC mechanism, the Mojo interface now uses shared memory instead of name pipes and things like that because of its performance advantages. So on Windows, which is of course as I said, my main area of expertise, the way in which shared memory works is by creating a kernel object called a section. And this section represents basically the sort of information about where that memory lives and what permissions are associated with that memory. And in order to access it, you get access to a handle in the process, which is basically a number. And that number can be passed back to the kernel, and it can dereference it and work out where this section object is in memory. In order to then use it, you need to map that section into memory using a special system call. And what you can actually map into memory, like whether you can map read or you can map write, is determined by the access permissions associated with the handle. So in this particular piece of code, it starts with going, okay, we assume that the destination process is allowed to read from this memory block, because otherwise, why are you sharing the memory if they can't read the memory itself? It seems a bit silly. However, the shared memory class has a flag which says, actually, this is read-only, and so if it's not set, it also adds this access permission to allow mapping that block as write. And then finally, once it's calculated the access permissions, it can call this special system called duplicate handle, which basically makes a copy of that handle into an arbitrary process. So it can copy that handle with a specific set of access rights into the renderer process. So if it's read-only, that handle in the renderer process only has read access, and in theory, can only map that memory block as read-only. So what's the problem with that? Well, the way in which Windows was designed was, if you want to share one of these kernel objects, these named sections between two different processes, you're supposed to give it a name. This name is sort of in a sort of like underlying like file system for objects. And when the other process wants to access it, it opens it by name. And so at that point, some security decision has to be made. Are you as a user allowed to open that section object or not? So for that reason, it has associated security, which defines what you're allowed to do with that object. However, Chrome was just using this duplicate handle mechanism to transfer those handles across. And so it wasn't giving a name to this section. So Windows goes, well, because you're not giving it a name, we assume you're not sharing it with anybody. Therefore, we don't have any security permissions associated with that. And that turns out to be a problem. Because if we get in our renderer process this read-only handle to the section object, there's nothing stopping us calling duplicate handle again to re-add that write access, because there's no security checks going on. It just goes, well, there is no security, so sure, you can have write back. That's not a problem. And so, of course, that potentially compromised renderer can now read and write that section object where the assumption was in the code that this is immutable and shouldn't be able to be accessed. And from that, potentially you can compromise other renderers and even the browser process in certain circumstances. So I found this bug back in 2014, and I reported it like the good citizen that I am. And the end result was, it's like we shouldn't really be using this. I don't think we're using it for anything interesting today. It's not like we're not saying we're not going to fix it, but we're really going to bump it down to low severity because, yeah. And of course, the problem with bumping it to low severity is, of course, well, if someone does add a use case for read-only sections, so everyone will have forgotten about this bug. right? Everyone will have forgotten that this bug ever existed, and so you'll automatically be vulnerable to this attack without necessarily realizing that. And this happens so often in large products like Windows and Chrome, that a bug which is just ignored turns out to actually be important somewhere down the line. So I said, okay, I guess I'll have to fix it myself. And yeah, just get a job at Google, right? Just go and get a job at the vendor. Now, to be fair, the bugs I was reporting in Chrome was what actually brought my name to prominence when Chris Evans, who was head of Chrome security at the time, was setting up Project Zero. So actually, these bugs indirectly ended up with me being employed by Google. But yeah, it is the flippant idea that just get a job at the vendor and you can fix whatever you like. So once I had a secure job and they were paying me stupid money to sit around in front of a computer, all I needed to do was find a read-only section in Chrome which had something interesting in it, and then exploit that to demonstrate impact and fix it. What could go wrong? So what I actually found was a read-only section was being used in the implementation of something called Grease Monkey. I don't know how many people have heard of that. I don't know how often it's used these days. But what Grease Monkey is, or content scripts, or user scripts, depending on which web page you're looking at the time, is an extension mechanism which allows you to run arbitrary JavaScript in the context of web pages rendering on your web browser. So the script has like a match field which says anything on this host, inject this arbitrary JavaScript into it. And it turns out that this read-only section was usually empty, which is why when I probably originally found it, it's like, well, I don't really know what this is. If you actually install one of these extensions, it turns out that it contains the data associated with this user script. So of course you can map it read-write, manipulate it, add your own script code, say that, oh, I want to attack this web page, like match to this website. And so you get universal cross-site scripting from one compromised renderer into any other web page. And this is an example of it being popping an alert in the Chrome sign-in page. So of course you could steal Google credentials if they're trying to sign in. You could also compromise the downloads page, and there was like a known way of going from the downloads page to sandbox escape. And yeah, this was basically my demonstration of actually this is a real bug and this has impact and it should be fixed. So I fixed it myself. Basically the fix was on Windows 7, you had to give the sections a name. So if you look at old versions of Chrome running on Windows 7, you may see it like it's got like a massive list of section objects which just randomly assign names. In Windows 8, it turns out Microsoft had already realized that this was a potential type of security issue, not in Chrome specifically, but in general, and so added completely in an undocumented fashion, as is Microsoft's typical way of doing things, which allows you to actually assign security to these objects, because normally you wouldn't even be allowed to assign security to those objects. So it got fixed, and I also got my first public blog post for Project Zero out of it as well, which I thought was good. Okay, so that was sort of the like low priority. Yeah, we don't think it's a bug, but we just don't feel like it's worth our time to actually fix this kind of example. So let's go on to an example of a sort of the alternate where it's like it's by design, right? So this was a bug in the Windows implementation of IPsec. And IPsec, if you don't know, is a way of encrypting IP network traffic in a theory, sort of like a transparent way, so that the sort of upper level protocols don't realize they're running over an encrypted protocol. So it's not like TLS where you have to explicitly add TLS on top of your protocol. This is actually working at the lower level. So the first thing you need to do if you want to communicate using IPsec is do a key exchange. And this is to establish something called a security association on both the client and the server. And to do this, it uses a standardized protocol called the Internet Key Exchange. And for that purpose, you could use common mechanisms of key exchange, like public key encryption, Diffie-Hellman. You can pre-shared key if you really want to do that. But the end result is this security association gives you an encryption key, which can then be used to encrypt your IP traffic. As I say, that's kind of happening all under the hood. You shouldn't necessarily see that. Of course, there's a management burden associated with it, but from a user perspective, you don't realize you're necessarily going over an encrypted channel. But Microsoft, being Microsoft, they said that feels not proprietary enough for our liking. Like we need to, as is common in large committee-based internet protocols, there's a lot of wiggle room to add extensions. And so Microsoft said, wouldn't it be cool if we could utilize the authentication protocols already built into Windows? If you saw Yuri's talk last night about SSPI, like this is the sort of authentication schemes that he was talking about. Wouldn't it be cool if we'd use that to do the internet key exchange mechanism? And that gives us both the mechanisms to sort of authenticate the user, so you can authenticate endpoints, and that obviously has the ability to then go, okay, we can have a policy which says only this user is allowed to talk to this server using IPsec, for example. But because of the way in which it can use this authentication, it can also do the key exchange mechanism as well at the same time. So I looked at that and went, well, you've got what is effectively a client talking to potentially an untrusted host, because the way in which Windows is configured for IPsec is you say, these range of IP addresses must be IPsec encrypted to be able to be used. So if your evil host is sitting in one of these IP address ranges, almost any network communication to them will instantiate an IPsec tunnel, which of course means that the client needs to set up the security associations and, in this case, use auth-IP using one of the SSPI authentication protocols. So of course, for things like NTLM, well, you've now sent us authentication NTLM tokens to an untrusted host on the network, and we can now potentially forward them on, we can relay them on to, say, the file server and compromise your network from that. So I thought that's kind of interesting. And NTLM just never dies, right? Like NTLM relay never dies. This is one of the more recent attacks using the Active Directory certificate service. Basically, it spins up on an Active Directory server. It can spin up a web service which allows you to get X509 certificates for a particular user. And once that user has an X509 certificate, you can use that to authenticate them to the domain. And it turns out this web service could just be NTLM relayed to. Like if you have NTLM traffic, you can relay to it, get a certificate for that relayed user, and compromise the network. So of course, Microsoft is saying, look, everyone, just disable NTLM, right? Like the NTLM is so bad, we need to stop using NTLM. Please, please. We're not going to turn it off by default, because that's a bridge too far, but like, we recommend you turn this off. So, of course, if NTLM is supposed to be off, that only leaves us with things like Kerberos. And it turns out Kerberos, in the traditional way of thinking, can't be relayed. And the reason for that is the way in which Kerberos works. So when you try and authenticate using Kerberos, the client picks something called a security principal name, or SPN. And this defines the service and the host that they are communicating to. And what it then does, that gets passed to the domain controller, which is running the Kerberos key distribution center. And it uses this SPN to select an encryption key associated with that SPN. And so the ticket gets encrypted using this key, and only the service which knows what this key is can decrypt the ticket and validate the authentication. So of course, if I'm getting in the way with my evil host application, I say, okay, it's going to try and communicate to me like on SMB or CIFS, which is the Common Internet File System service, to evil host. And so of course the client goes, hey, okay, I need a Kerberos ticket for CIFS/evil host. And assuming that comes back, the evil host can forward that on to the server. But of course, the servers need CIFS file server, which turns out to be a completely different encryption key. So as the ticket can't be decrypted, well, no authentication occurs. And this is the sort of guiding principle of why relaying Kerberos should be impossible to do, because the client should never try and give you a ticket for the wrong service. However, AuthIP had an answer for that. Turns out if you go and read the specification, one of the fields that the server, so the untrusted host on the network, can send back to the client is, this is the SPN of the authentication I want you to use. So the client doesn't generate one and go, oh, okay, I need to specify this explicit one. No, you can just tell it, hey, I'm CIFS file server. Can you send me a ticket for that SPN? Thank you very much. And of course, what that means is you can get a ticket for that service, forward it onto the file server, and complete authentication. And ultimately, this means you can relay Kerberos in this very specific scenario. So, of course, I reported this, and MSRC, they acknowledge that it is a potential security issue, but it's only moderate, it's spoofing, and so it doesn't meet the bar for fixing. And fundamentally, it's a by design issue. Realistically, you shouldn't be using AuthIP. It's deprecated. Again, we're not going to turn it off by default, because that would be stupid. It would annoy too many people. But you should just not use it. Use IKE v2 or use AuthIP, but use certificate authentication instead of SSPI authentication. So yeah, that was it. They don't care. They don't care about Kerberos relaying at all, which I thought, hey, open season, I guess. let's do a bit more research. So at that point, I spent a bit of time researching other network protocols to see how vulnerable they are to sort of similar attacks. How are these other protocols deriving the SPN value which it uses to get the Kerberos ticket? And it turns out that many protocols from HTTP, RPC, and DCOM all have mechanisms by which the malicious host can influence the SPN used for the authentication protocol and effectively do Kerberos relay attacks through that. And so I wrote up a big blog post about this, say, isn't this cool? And I can tell you all about it because, of course, Microsoft already said we don't care about authentication relay in Kerberos. It's not our problem. So, tough, right? Any problems are their own problems. Of course, it turns out there's some fallout from this, right? If you're going to not fix this stuff, well, don't be surprised when cleverer people than me actually come along and start weaponizing this into actual real tooling and using this in real engagements and actually exploiting domains using this Kerberos relay techniques. And so this is actually, obviously it got so prominent that the Microsoft Threat Intelligence blog had an entire post about preventing privilege escalation attacks leveraging Kerberos relay, when of course, based on the response from Microsoft, it was just a moderate spoofing attack. There was no privilege escalation involved, right? But well, I guess there really was, right? So yeah, if they'd fixed it at the time, I might have still done the research, but they might have had the opportunity to have first dibs of okay, can we fix these bugs? What can we do to mitigate that? Instead, I just mic dropped, tough shit, you can have whatever you like, and I don't care, right? You just let people use this technique and do whatever they want, right? So yeah. Definitely a learning lesson for Microsoft, but they never learn their lesson in this regard. So, if you are in a scenario where either the vendor has said, we're not going to fix this bug because we just don't care enough, or you're reasonably suspicious that they're probably not going to fix that bug, what can you do about it to make you feel better about yourself? Other than not doing it at all, of course. One of them is just, if a vendor has sort of servicing criteria which says these are the kind of bugs we will fix, these are the security boundaries we'll support, anything else is something we will not do, we will not support, well then it at least means you don't have to do reporting. If the bug that you found, regardless of your opinion on whether it's a security issue or not, If it falls within one of these criteria of like, this is not really a security bug that they're willing to fix, well, you can just not report them, right? And that saves you a lot of pain, a lot of heartache. Now you could, if you're really dedicated, go back to the research and really sort of pushing it. See if you can find an angle which means that they will fix it. Like, demonstrate that this actually is an important security vulnerability that you really must fix. Because I have a date with the beach, and I really need to be relaxing on the beach. I don't need to be talking to you as a vendor. You can do that. In general, certainly for the big vendors, it's probably not really worth your time, in my opinion, because there's a good chance they'll just say no again. But it's up to you. Now, of course, you could just fix it yourself. I did joke that, of course, I got a job at Google, but at least for Chromium, there is a process in place that you can do external contributions to it, even if you're not a member of Google. Any open source project especially will have processes that you can contribute patches. One of my colleague Jan Horn does obviously a lot of Linux stuff, and usually will then submit a patch as well at the same time and say, hey, this is a bug, and this is also the patch to fix it. And obviously once you can get it through the approval process into the Linux kernel, well, then that solves the problem. Like even if it's an edge case bug, which some vendors may consider to be a won't fix, well, you can still fix it yourself. Now, of course, if you have a really cool bug and the vendor, you think the vendor's not going to give two hoots about it, or they do say no, they're not interested, there are potentially alternatives to direct vendor reporting. For example, you could use it as part of a chain in Pwn to Own or one of the other vulnerability competitions. There are, of course, many alternative reporting channels that I would not like to list here, but you can use your imagination as to, there will be someone out there who probably is interested in that bug, even if the vendor doesn't care, right? So you do you. And of course, the nuclear option is just go, I'm just going to tell everybody, right? I'm not going to do anything, right? I'm just going to dump it on full disclosure mailing list, or at least write up a blog post about it, do a conference presentation about it. And especially if the vendor said this is a won't fix, they really haven't got much of a leg to stand on if they start going, well, no, you can't talk about that. Like, if you're not going to fix it, right? Like I can talk about whatever I like. Like, you cannot behold me to doing anything. Of course, they might try and pressure you with like, well, if you just don't report it, we might throw you a couple of grand your way, and then like, if you trust them to do that, then fine. But yeah, my view would be, you know what? Just go full disclosure. So yeah, I guess in conclusion to that, why you should care about a vulnerability, even if the vendor doesn't, right? One of them is, of course, you can publish the full details of this issue. Caveat, obviously, in most cases. Like, if you're working in a company, obviously make sure that you consult with the appropriate people of importance, lawyers especially, as to whether you're actually allowed to do that. Like, a lot of companies will have maybe a commercial arrangement with certain vendors, like Microsoft, say, and you just dumping some bug online and saying, like, Microsoft suck because they refuse to fix this bug, might not go down too well in your management chain. So obviously, if you're in those sort of positions, it's best to ask permission in those cases. For me, Project Zero, if it's Microsoft, we don't care, right? Like, we can usually report anything we like because, like, what are they going to do? If they said they're not going to fix it, that's their problem. Now, even if your bug doesn't get fixed, it might still drive security improvements. So, like I mentioned, like UAC earlier, so user account control on Windows, that is de facto not a security boundary on Windows. Like, if you find a bug in UAC to bypass it, it's not a bug that Microsoft will fix. That's not to say that they won't fix them eventually. Like, sometimes UAC bypasses, you report them, they won't fix them, but in some later versions of Windows, they just miraculously get fixed. So are they a bug? Are they not a bug? Hard to tell. And it kind of this whole won't fix idea of things like UAC backfires. So Microsoft are trying to release their new replacement for UAC called admin protection, which is just actually UAC with a mustache and a large hat. It is basically the same technology driving it. And there was actually a number of bypasses that me and other people had found in the past, which were not fixed in their move to admin protection, because any bug that we had found previously was not a security bug, right? So they didn't have visibility of the types of bypasses they had for this technology. So when it came to actually implementing this new and super secure feature that they're definitely going to use as a security boundary, they forgot to check all the existing bypasses, especially the more complicated ones. And hopefully now that those things are getting fixed. So yes, even if that bug is not fixed, it still potentially is interesting and useful for the security community. The bug might be useful in different environments. Like, you might find a bug which, in and of itself, doesn't meet the bar of a for security impact, but taken in a different context, running from a different privilege level, it might actually become a real security issue. And again, this kind of feeds into you can use it as a part of a chain in, say, pwn to own, for example. It might lead you to a better bug. Maybe that research is not completely in vain, and that leads you onto something more interesting. And it might improve your job opportunities. Because, especially if you do write-ups, like Project Zero loves a good write-up. And one of the criteria we kind of select for when we're choosing new members of staff is, do they have a public profile? And if they do, what are they writing about? What sort of vulnerabilities have they found in the past? Even if it's not a security bug, in the sense that it's going to get fixed, just acknowledging the kind of work that you've done to find it and the ways in which you can exploit it are actually kind of interesting. And then finally, maybe you just want people to say, hey, you're cool. Like, I really like the bugs that you found, right? Bit of kudos, right? So yeah, that is the end of my presentation. Obviously, thank you very much for listening to me ramble on for 40 minutes. Now, in terms of questions, I mentioned I had a book. I have 3 copies of my Windows Internals book signed, sitting there. And if people want to ask questions, for any question they're asked, you might win a book. So has anyone got any questions they want to ask? Oh.
Do you feel that when you submit something from Project Zero, somebody like Microsoft comes a little bit more takes it?
Yeah, so yeah, the question is basically, do Microsoft, etc., treat our reports differently from other people who aren't known? Yeah, Microsoft have like a special flag in their system for this. This is a Project Zero bug, right? And it's mainly it's less about treating it like more seriously. Although just having your name, like, I'm pretty confident people treat me reporting a bug as more likely to be a real bug than not. The flag in their system is more about, do not let this go over 90 days, otherwise they're going to drop the bug in public, and then we have a fiasco on our hands, right? And it's kind of like a priority flag, like, don't forget this one. So yeah, they definitely do that. And that, of course, is a real problem. It's also why Project Zero try and always report bugs externally. So even things like Android and Chrome, we don't just try and slipstream like them straight into the system. We report them to the external mailing list because we want to be treated as much as possible as if we were an external researcher, because there's no value in testing the system if they can go, oh, we'll prioritize this because a Googler actually sent it to us. So, cool.
Thank you for your good presentation.
Yeah.
So I think you have spent too much time in the Windows, so like more than 10 years. So is there any motivation you have started to deep dive into the Windows?
To give up on Windows, or
is there any motivation that you have started to research on the Windows part?
Not really. Like, I don't know. I try. If I'm being honest, like a lot of my research these days is very much focused on just like minor stuff, which like doesn't cause big impact because I'm not really feeling the urge to research at the moment. But yeah, it's a bit different. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was a really nice blend between yesterday's keynote and today. And because like I feel that here also we are shaping the new generation, there are a lot of students. I would like to ask, what do you think is like the current drive in researchers for moving to this legitimate responsible disclosure, let's say, parts to more debatable or like not so legitimate? Because you mentioned it in a way after the point.
I never said anything.
No. I don't mean it in a way of if you like want to report something like this, but is this situation that you described pushing researchers into more like gray zones or not? Because from my experience in my industry, this is actually pushing a lot of researchers into this, and this is not a really nice thing to do, especially from behemoths like Google and Microsoft, that they need to incentivize and push people into reporting this kind of vulnerabilities.
I guess the problem comes down to a lot of times money, like also dealing with the vendors themselves. Like I've heard a lot of people talk about how bad MSRC is at the moment in terms of like almost like talking to a brick wall, and it's very difficult for. Say I get a different experience to like a new student who's just trying to do the research. I think it's very hard though to incentivize people to report directly to the vendor responsively, because it's even now with bug bounties, it's still reliant on so much goodwill, and I think a lot of vendors have burnt a lot of that goodwill over the years, and I don't agree with people selling into the grey markets, but I understand where they're coming from. I understand why they might do that, and I don't know how easy it would be to ever deal with that and change that. So it's quite difficult. So,
thank you.
Right.
Hello. Hello. Given your focus on Windows, did you ever consider joining Microsoft to fix their bugs? That's one. And or maybe over the years, do you develop a closer relationship with certain individuals in Microsoft to talk to them more closely about their bugs?
I've tried a few times. Like I was actually offered a job at Microsoft before I joined Google, and before I even won my like $100,000 Microsoft bounty. So my life would be very different if I was just like a peon in MSRC all those years ago, and I'm so glad I never took that role. They've kind of tried, they don't try very hard, so like they need to pay me a lot of money, I think, to want to do it. But as an external researcher, I have tried to interact better with Microsoft. I've tried to say, look, come to me if you've got a security feature that you're implementing, like the admin protection stuff. Come to me and I'll give you my advice as to where it is. Completely pro bono, right? I'm not going to charge you for it. I can't charge you for it. And they rarely take me up on that offer because there's an aspect of, obviously, secrecy. They can't tell me about some internal feature they're developing. But also, I think there's a bit of pride that, oh no, we're clever enough. We don't need to get external researchers to come and help us because we're smart enough. Like we'll do it ourselves. And then, of course, you shame them when you find bugs in their admin protection or recall or whatever they're trying to do, right? Like, it's a very difficult challenge for someone who is. If I was an independent researcher, I could probably get them to pay me as a vendor. Working completely in a separate company makes it very difficult to achieve that, and so I've pursued it at times, and it's just generally not worth my time to put in. So, okay.
Yeah.
I think, oh, sorry.
To continue on the question previously asked, at Quarks Lab we report quite often bugs, and it's very difficult. We have to be very patient. We go through a lot of meetings with the clients because they need to understand what's going on, what will happen. And you mentioned the nuclear option, which is to go public. Basically, each time we tell them that we will have a presentation at this conference, and they ask, but that's crazy, we will not be ready, what can we do? So it's very difficult. And you can look at many blog posts, we put the timeline. That's one of the things we do in our blog post. We put the timeline of the first time we reach out to them, each time we have a contact with them, and some timelines are really crazy. So I strongly advise everybody to understand how vulnerability disclosure works. Read some of our blog posts, and you will see the timelines.
Yeah.
My point, and I agree with what you are saying, I think it's unfortunately easier to sell bugs than to report them. The main problem is that I don't see any incentive for Microsoft, Google, or smaller companies, and Microsoft and Google have huge teams dealing with vulnerability disclosure. I don't see incentives for editors to fix bugs. And I think that's the root cause of all these issues that we are having. If you have any ideas, I would be very interested to hear them to incentivize the editors to fix bugs. That's my question. Good luck.
Who knows? I wish I had an answer, right? Like, it's very difficult to incentivize them to fix bugs. Like, obviously, like Chrome, etc., tries their best, right? Like, but again, there are resource constraints that like make it very difficult to like expend more resources than necessary. I think it's been quoted like Microsoft like paid like $1 million per fix or something like that, or more, right? And they see that as a bottom line thing. And like, why incentivize these? We would ideally prefer no one ever reports a bug to us at all, right? Because like that saves us massive amounts of money. If we never update people because there's no security bugs, fantastic. So maybe what we need to do is get all of the researchers to not report anything to Microsoft, and then like there'll be no more security bugs, and we can just live in peace and happiness.
Yoo-hoo.
In ignorance. But yeah, I think that's probably it. Yep. Oh.
Hi. So
Yeah.
since yesterday and today, I've been witnessing a lot of like epic boss fights against big companies like Google, Microsoft. Very big thing. I mean, you guys are like epic level bug hunters. Now, for those who are just starting out, like they're level 1 or level 0, where would you recommend? Which ecosystems do you recommend for us to try to slay slime before we can level up? I mean, things where you know, not where all you guys are playing it, but ecosystems that is under research, and you think that it will be impactful for low level or new people who are starting out to start their research. Thanks.
New like. I think certainly things like like Windows and stuff are quite heavily saturated in terms of like there's still a lot of researchers impactful. Like I think sort of medical device research. I think the problem with that though is it's the startup cost of doing it, right? Like if you want a high impact area to look at, then things like that are probably very, very easy to find bugs in sort of medical equipment. And also highly impactful because some of these things are like critical for life and death of some people. But I can imagine there's a massive startup cost associated with that if you can get the devices at all, right? Like if a device costs like 50 grand, then a student is not going to be able to afford that, right? So yeah, I think sort of an actual impact, like I guess just plug away at mobile devices. Like that's the thing people use all the time. Like desktop is still there, but like it really isn't the place to be in, right? So mobile devices is definitely the place to look at, and some of it is relatively easy to find bugs in, shockingly, which shouldn't be the case, but it is. Right? Yeah.
Sorry, due to the very tight schedule, we still can take about just one more last question from the floor, please.
Okay.
Hi James, thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
I've seen that you have reported many logical vulnerabilities on Windows, and I'm kind of curious, what's your stance on the potential of such logical vulnerabilities on more locked down systems such as iOS or Android, especially after new mitigations like MTE that is going to kill memory corruption bugs?
So yeah, I think the one thing which keeps me, I suppose, a little hopeful for my job is the fact that regardless of how well memory corruption is mitigated through, say, use of Rust or MT and stuff like that, there's always logical vulnerabilities because it's very difficult to create a complex system which doesn't have like some security issues associated with it. So a good example was like Microsoft had, they implemented a version of sudo on Windows, and they wrote it in Rust. And so in theory, no memory corruptions. There will be no security bugs in it. So I go and find like 5 logical vulnerabilities in it, because just because it's written in Rust doesn't mean those bugs don't exist. Ironically, someone came along later, one of my Google colleagues, found a memory corruption in the pseudo binary because of the interactions between Rust and the native APIs. And so even in the absence of that, and MTE, until we turn it on like synchronously and it always acts, there still might be scenarios where MTE isn't covering like certain types of memory corruption vulnerabilities that you will still find ways. I do recall being told one time that Windows Vista, would solve memory corruption vulnerabilities for good. And of course, look where we are now, like almost like 15 years later, that never became true, right? Like every time mitigations have been introduced, someone cleverer than me comes along and finds a way of bypassing it. So I do think I'll still find logical vulnerabilities until the end of time. Or at least until the end of my time. But yeah, I'd be skeptical about memory corruptions going away anytime soon. Like, it'd be nice, but I just don't think that's going to be the case. So, okay, thanks very much. As I say, I've only got 3 books, so anybody who asked a question, you can always fight it out amongst yourselves as who wants a copy. Like, I want deathmatch, right? Like, if there's not blood on the floor, then I'm not, you know. Or the first 3 people to come who asked the question who come to the front can have a copy. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, James.